Good day and welcome. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today I'm joined by Calgary mayoral candidate Jeremy Farkas. Many of you will recall that he was the runner-up in the previous Calgary mayoral race with a strong second-place finish, but didn't quite get over the top. He's back again, and according to some polls, the leading candidate now to defeat incumbent Mayor Joti Gondek. I've known Jeremy for a long time. We go back a ways, but I'm pleased to welcome him to our studio today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a great opportunity.
So, a couple different areas. There'll be policy to get into. But maybe I'll start with the few parts of this. So, the one big thing big majority of Calgarians are agreed on is they want Joti Gondek gone.
That's right.
Not a fan of how she's governed. It was largely a continuation, I think, many like myself would see as from the Nenshi government, or administration, possibly going even further in that direction. Most Calgarians want her gone, and she is, according to most polls, on track to be the first incumbent since, I think, the early 1980s to actually lose. Calgary mayor incumbents don't lose. They retire when they're going to lose, so they don't actually lose. She looks... I mean, knock on wood, I'm going to spoil the whole thing here. I'm going to exit, but she is on track to very possibly lose. So the question is, who do we vote for, both to make sure she loses and to get the best possible city administration in place? In the last mayoral election, you were, I think, correctly perceived as the most conservative major candidate. And... you didn't win, but you had consolidated most of the conservative vote. Jeff Davison, I think, was viewed as a very moderate, kind of light conservative. Now, so-called splitting of the vote would not have been enough. Joti Gondek would have won even without that.
Yeah, even if you were to add Jeff and I together as one candidate, it still wouldn't have been enough.
Yeah, and I say so-called vote splitting because it's kind of a thing, but not as much as people actually think. But it is a bit of a thing. But, after the last election, you went on, I call it your Forrest Gump run, you... I
was here telling Corey all about it, yeah.
Yeah. And...
I think the bigger point is, despite the fact I lost, my phone just kept ringing. It was amazing. So many Calgarians from a broad cross-section of the city and political spectrum reached out, and it's the perfect example of being able to make lemonade.
Yeah. But I know what it's like to lose an election. It sucks. It's hard. And
you learn who your friends are, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You really do. You learn who were just kind of the hangers-on, who are want to maybe be on the winning team and maybe get a bit, piece of the pie when it's all done. They want to be in your staff, or they're going to want contracts or whatever. You figure out who those are when you're down. But after a loss, I didn't go on an actual big Forrest Gump run, but I had my figurative walk in the desert too, where you're reflecting. But you came out of that, I think it's fair to say, a guy with perhaps a different political persuasion. You're, I think, pretty broadly viewed as having shifted away from being a more strident conservative that you were known as before to uncharitably saying more left words, maybe being more charitable, to the center, however you want to phrase that. Less conservative.
And I would push back a little bit about that, because I think you and I have been relatively consistent, relatively social libertarians, fiscally responsible, live and let live.
Oh, no, I'm radicalized since I'm not a libertarian anymore. Well, I'm totally radicalized.
But the reason
I've changed too.
The reason I say that is people can make a point of me attending the Pride Parade this year. Well, I've attended Pride for the last 10 plus years. You could run the tape and you could see photos of you and I wearing Pride shirts in the Pride Parade for the Wild Rose 10 plus years ago, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I've always been about fighting for my constituents, for financial responsibility, for transparency. And I don't know, like many Calgarians, I don't think it's really easy to put me in the box. I describe myself as an old school PC, fiscally responsible, socially live and let live.
But you weren't PC. You were a Wild Rose. You were on the libertarian.
Yeah, I didn't like the corruption, right? I wanted the voice of the people represented in the decisions that were being made. And that was always what I did as a city councilor, like advocating for the people. And, it's hard, but you got to keep your promises. Like I was the only city councilor who actually kept their promise to decline the city council golden pension at great personal cost. And now we have other candidates in this race actually attacking me for that decision.
Yeah,
it's pretty crazy, right?
So
if there is an actual fiscal conservative in this race, it's probably the person who left $500,000 at City Hall by keeping their promise.
I do agree very much that some of the flack, I've never seen someone take flack for not taking the pension. I've seen politicians try to downplay it because they did take it. Okay. And I'm going to get into that with some of the other candidates here. I'm with you 100% on that. But without getting too deeply into that part, there's a difference between a social progressive and a social libertarian. I always saw myself as a libertarian when I was in the Wild Rose. I'm less libertarian today. I still have some of those parts of my views there, but I've hardened up in some areas. But the social progressive is someone who uses the power of the state to advance in a particular direction rather than just kind of a laissez-faire social.
That's why I describe myself as socially live and let live, right? I want to,
which is why I wouldn't use the word social progressive. That's different than a social libertarian.
But I hate the labels. The short and large of it is the labels don't really work in municipal politics, and that's part of the reason I'm running is to be able to represent Calgarians and not some political party or some ideological bent. And it's been the Sharp and Gondeks of the world bringing in their ideology, right? Day one, Sharp and Gondek declaring it's climate emergency, right? Saying we're done with oil and gas.
No, Sharp wasn't for the climate emergency.
She voted for it.
You're sure about that?
Absolutely. You can run the tape. Day one, support for the climate emergency.
Okay.
It's a 13-2 vote.
Okay. I know she's very much said she was against it, but let's make a note production to we'll fact check that.
Well, she was for it before she was against it.
Okay. Well, we'll fact. We're gonna fact check that one.
Western Standard Production fact-checked the claim and confirmed that Sonia Sharp did, in fact, supported the climate emergency declaration, but voted against adopting the climate strategy due to concerns over its lack of detail on costs, funding sources, and implementation.
But the bigger point, though, is how do we build a city that's focused on being affordable, on being safe? How do we take the ideological persuasions out of it and just focus on getting the job of the city done? And that's really what my platform has been about. And that's the through line of my career as a city councilor, keeping my promises, picking up the phone when people called, and doing the work of the people who elected me.
Okay. But you're very widely perceived as, last election, you were very widely perceived as the more solidly conservative candidate. I remember, you voted against the mask mandate. Nenshi had brought forward a vote. I think it was very much engineered for election timing because the majority of Calgarians were just kind of going along with what was going on at the time. Yeah, sure. Okay. Council wants a mask mandate. They would support it. It would harm you electorally, but you voted against it nonetheless. How would you, we have a lot of hindsight now, but would you change how you voted? Because that was a kind of a pivotal moment, perhaps, in the mayoral campaign when you voted against the mask mandate on the minority side of council. How would you vote again today?
Well, I've been clear to Calgarians. I've grown in the past 10 years. The city's grown in the past 10 years. I don't regret fighting for my constituents, right? I can walk you through the evidence, the details on a vote-by-vote basis, but I find it's very interesting how the candidates in this race would rather attack me in the positions I took 10 years ago than talk about their own failed record, right?
So I'm asking about how you voted 4 years ago, and how you voted was something I very much supported, how you voted, but would you change how you voted in hindsight? Because you've evolved in 4 years. Have your views changed about how you would have voted 4 years ago, say on the mask?
On that issue, no. My concern was just the jurisdiction of the municipality, right? For me, it was an open choice for whether Calgarians should be masking, and I maintain that position today. It's not up for me to decide, but again, how much time the other candidates are spending attacking me in the positions I took versus talking about what they've done. The fact is that it was Sharp and Gondek cutting our police budget, cutting our mental health funding locally here that's caused the great surge in Calgarians feeling unsafe in the downtown. They had 7 years, or rather 12 years collectively as members of council, 20 plus years working in city administration to be able to do all this stuff that they say all of a sudden that they coulda, shoulda, woulda done. So again, I'm happy to debate my record. When they were declaring the climate emergency, I was walking, crawling, bleeding for 172 days across North America. When they were ignoring our water pipes, I was working with our provincial government to build a new flood mitigation project on the Bow River to protect Calgary from another flood. So I'm happy to talk about the record, but they can't keep attacking positions I took 10 years ago in order to defend themselves from their record from last week.
Sure. Well, let's say where I'm coming from, and I think most Western Center readers and viewers would say is they really liked your positions 10 years ago. They liked that Jeremy Farkas. And a lot have concerns that you have shifted. And I know you, I don't think that's political opportunism. If you have changed, I think it's a genuine change of heart that you come by it honestly. But the concern of a lot of kind of conservative leaning Calgarians is that you're perceived by many to not be that guy we really liked that they voted for.
You remember how the media went at me the last time in 2021? I was way too right wing, and now the same kind of smear campaign is happening that I'm way too left wing. But in this race, I'm the only one who's actually kept his promises. I followed through on the decision to turn down the pension. I've done the work of representing my constituents, and there's a lot of people out there who might be mad at me for positions I've taken or things that I've done. But never have I actually broken my promises. And that's the challenge that I give to these folks is don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. I'm the only one in this race who can defeat Joti Gondek and do what hasn't been done in 45 years, to unseat a sitting mayor. So again, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative.
Mm-hmm. I will get into the kind of the strategic voting and who could beat Gondek, because it's a very important part here. Gondek is certainly coming at you from, how you voted when you were on council before the last election here. But the concern for more conservatives is, concern that you have, that your own views have shifted over the last 4 years.
I think the question is on what, right? Be specific. Like if you go to my website today, you'll see
put it to you in general, like, do you think you are, say, more of a centrist now than you were 4 years ago?
I'm not using those labels. Like I'm focused on financial responsibility. I'm focused on controlling the city budget. I'm focused on cracking down on Calgary's repeat violent offenders. I'm focused on reopening a downtown police station, right? I do not care what labels people give to me. I've been called everything under the sun. I just want to do the work of building this team, bringing this council together, working together with our premier to get things done. I'm sick and tired of the labels. And I know, like a lot of Calgarians, I don't fit comfortably in a box, right? So judge me based on my ideas. I've always followed through on my promises, and that's what I'm committed to do as Calgary's next mayor.
But in the last election, you fit relatively comfortably into a, broadly speaking, conservative box. I mean, I know you've got nuances in position. You don't agree with, say, party lines on everything. Yeah. I never have as well. Those labels are imprecise and imperfect, but in the broad strokes, they mean something.
Yeah.
And I think it would be fair to say last time you fit into the broadly speaking conservative box, just put the Jeremy Farkas brand of conservatism. Do you think you still fit within the broader, would you still say you are broadly speaking, a conservative still?
I would describe myself as fiscally responsible, socially live and let live, right? Like I would say I'm happy to spend money on the things that we actually see the value for. I'm not happy with blowing $1 billion for the Flames like Sharp and Gondek did. That's not particularly fiscally responsible. But again, I'm asking Calgarians to judge my platform as a whole, right? If you look at my website today at jeremy.ca, number 1 is fiscal responsibility. Number 2 is public safety. Number 3 is repealing blanket rezoning, right? So on an issue by issue basis, that's the challenge that I'm posing to Calgarians is the question of Calgary's next mayor is not who is the best conservative. The question is who can beat Joti Gondek, who can defeat a sitting mayor and do what hasn't been done in 45 years. Other candidates have tried, but at best in the polling, they've been able to match Joti Gondek's support. So my pitch to Calgarians again is I'm the only one in this race who can stop a political party takeover of city council, change the direction of city hall, and actually deliver safety and affordability for Calgarians.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Kind of broadly speaking, strategic voting, however we want to put that. Calgarians, broadly speaking, want Joti Gondek gone.
I'd say broadly speaking, they want this council gone, right? Because when you look at the major Things like the water main break, the inattention to our infrastructure. You look at the botched arena deal. You look at the climate emergency. Sharp and Gondek were in lockstep on a lot of those issues that Calgarians are pinning rightfully on the mayor, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's collective
the mayor is kind
frustration.
of the personal face we put on the whole council, and that is obviously not a particularly correct thing to do, but it tends to be how people view it.
Well, it's not just the face. It's Sharp and others voting for things like the climate emergency, voting for the arena deal, right? So this is about change versus more of the same, right? If you want more of the same, if you want things like the Sharp Gondek arena deal, if you want the Sharp Gondek climate emergency, if you want the Sharp Gondek ban on paper bags, you got two great options in that. If you want to reward 12 years on city council and 20 years in city administration and still being unable to deliver, if you want to reward that, you have that.
Are you giving us plastic bags back?
What?
Yes.
Yes.
You're going to make plastic bags great
Well,
again.
within municipal control, obviously, you
Yeah.
have jurisdictional challenges with the federal government. But
Yeah,
for me, I just want to focus on the running of the city, right?
So in terms of municipal policies, straws and bags are going to be...
Look, I ran an environmental organization out at Colombo Ranch. I was CEO, right? I'm for the environment, but banning paper straws is not how you're going to save the turtles, right? Like there's a lot of work that we can do to actually make Calgary more efficient, save money for taxpayers, and actually meaningfully help the environment. But I'm not for this.
Like plastic bags for me and straws. I don't know why. I'm just like, I'll change my vote for someone on that. Like, I could be a single issue straw and bag voter.
Well,
it sets me off. If I was ever to be a terrorist,
I think that
blow
disqualifies Sharp and Gondek then for you. So,
Sharp is for keeping the bans.
Well, I'm not here to talk about those people, but what I'm
Well,
here to talk about is the record of this mayor and council, right? So a lot of these issues that people pin on the mayor, rightfully so, it's because folks like Sonia Sharp and others have voted to support that agenda.
So I just want to put it down. If you're mayor, you're coming out to give us our bags and straws back.
Within municipal jurisdiction. I think there's an override at the federal level right now.
Although that was beaten in court, so we probably get it back.
I'd have to get back to you on that, but I want my...
But everything you can do to get it back, we get it back?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of
I'm
people...
a single issue voter on this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think a lot of people can feel the woke leaving the body when you're trying to slurp up a paper straw.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, my virtue is melting in my hand, melting in the cup in front of me. Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of back to the question about beating Gondek.
But I welcome the challenge. I welcome the scrutiny, and I think in 2021, Joti Gondek didn't get that scrutiny, right? So I know that conservatives, progressives, everybody in the city is asking these hard questions of candidates, and I'm not a perfect candidate. I've made mistakes in the past. I've learned from them, but I don't think looking at new evidence on an issue by issue basis makes me a flip flopper. It just means that I have a working brain. But I'm always happy to be accountable. Like when I was a counselor, every single month for 4 years, 50 events in a row, I would report to my constituents. And I would do what was described as the most dangerous thing. I would give my constituents the microphone and I would speak if spoken to, but otherwise I would be there to answer questions, right? So I'm happy to put myself out there. I'm happy to explain myself. I'm happy to justify myself. And I'm also focused on actually providing what both Sharp and Gondek haven't, which is genuinely listening to Calgarians in terms of what they want from their city.
Okay, so let's talk about, kind of who's best positioned to... You're running for mayor, not for overall council. And I know council needs change, but talk about the mayor's race. I've been, terribly confused about, who can beat Gondek because all the campaigns are putting out their own polls. And, well,
Janet Brown has spoken, and she's somewhat
exactly, and
the Oracle of Alberta.
Yeah, and I was just like, okay, well, I have to worship at the altar of Brown here. She's good. I mean, she can be wrong, but she's probably going to be the most correct. So that's kind of the gold standard I've gone by, because all the campaigns are putting out their own stuff, and it's there's an agenda often to releasing you don't release a poll unless you have an agenda from your campaign, obviously. But Janet Brown's, that's independent, and I think that's credible. That showed you. Not an overwhelming, but pretty decisive lead. I think it was around 36-ish.
Yeah, and for me, the biggest thing is I'm not asking for support based on polls. I'm asking for support based on my safety plan, on repealing blanket rezoning, controlling costs, right? Okay. It's not enough to give people something to vote against. You got to give them something to vote for. Just yesterday, we released our full platform, which is on our website.
Okay, well, we'll talk about policies after this part. Yeah. So it showed you in first. So by the numbers, in a position to defeat Gondek. And then Gondek back a bit, tied essentially with Sonia Sharp, and then Jeff Davison in a respectable but well behind in fourth place. So a lot of Calgarians, especially those who read and listen to the Western Standard, they want Gondek gone, and then they want the most conservative possible replacement for that. And I know, conservative and liberal labels, except whatnot, are particularly difficult to apply to municipal. It's, we were talking about this before we got on the air. It's like we want government, make government boring again. Plow the streets, pick up the dog shit, make sure the water feeders don't burst. Pretty. It should be that. The basics. So those kind of ideological labels are partially applicable, but not entirely.
But it's weird. Like we mentioned, like I'm getting attacked by one other campaign who describes himself as a conservative for turning down the city council golden pension. Right? That was I agree. That's pretty weak. Canadian Taxpayers Federation verified that was almost a $500,000 impact to my family. Yet the so-called fiscal conservatives are attacking me over that, right? But it goes to show
that's a weak sauce attack.
Well, it goes to show that they want to attack me more than they want to hold the mayor accountable, right? And my focus is on holding this mayor and council accountable for their lack of attention to the economy, to spending, how they botched this whole blanket rezoning thing, how they've been focused more on climate emergencies than the actual nuts and bolts of running the city. And that's really what my campaign is about. It's about not just being the only person who can defeat Joti Gondek in this race, but also being financially responsible, focusing on the infrastructure, maintaining what we have. No more corporate welfare schemes, billion-dollar giveaways to the flames, right? We can have these great things as a city, but we got to work within what we have. And we have to build a better relationship with the provincial government. This is so essential.
So I know you take issue with this, but for voters who feel you've shifted, kind of away from more conservative positions that you held 4 years ago, people who at least perceive that.
Yeah, again, it really depends on the issue, right?
Yeah, but and so they're voting for or intending to vote for Davison or Sharp or leaning in that way. What would you say to them? Because because those who view, say, Davison or Sharp as being more conservative right now, what would your message be to them going into Election Day on Monday?
Make your vote count. Don't vote for a candidate who can't win. That's the central point. And vote for a candidate who can deliver what you want. An attention on public safety, on affordability, on controlling taxes. I'm the only one in this race who's actually put skin in the game as far as keeping their word, right? So when you look at the issues on blanket zoning, on safety, on taxes, a lot of the candidates are sounding a lot the same. So then the question for you becomes who actually has the credibility, who's actually followed through on the promises, who's actually taken the necessary positions, even when they're unpopular. And that's me in this race. Like many others in this race made that same promise to turn down the generous golden pension. I'm the only one in this race who actually kept that promise, right? So if you want to know who's actually in a position to win, to deliver, and actually follow through, I'm the one who checks all of those boxes.
Okay. Let's talk about the pension, but in a bigger context. I know you and I have talked about this before. When I was in politics, I tried to make some of these kind of symbolic self-sacrifices, and it gets you nothing. Most voters, unfortunately, they don't actually really recognize it. Some do, but they don't really do much on it. You don't get much in the way of credit back. You take the hit yourself, but the voter doesn't always appreciate it. I mean, the voters last time didn't appreciate it. You made that.
For me, it's not about the voters. It's about keeping my word as a candidate, as a man, as a person.
But the purpose of the promise. So, back when I was with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, I led the research project that kind of really got into the nuts and bolts of boring actuaries of the member parliament pension plan. And they didn't get rid of the pension plan, but they significantly reformed it so that MPs were paying at least half of it. And the purpose of that wasn't to make MPs poorer. It was to give them a moral license to reform public sector pension plans, defined benefit pension plans. And, I won't get into defined benefit contribution stuff. It'll bore people to death, although it's really important stuff. But the purpose of it is to give the political leadership of a government the moral license to make changes that are going to actually save money on a bigger level, say with the public sector pensions. Similarly, when the Kenney government came in, they cut MP pay by, I think, 10% or something, but then they didn't cut the pay of the public service. I mean, I was like, well, what was the point of that? The point was to say, fine, we all have to tighten our belts in the government's spending too much money. But if we're going to ask, bureaucrats working in an office or a guy picking up the garbage to take a hit, we're going to take it with you. So we're not above this. We're all in it together, kind of thing. But then they didn't end up doing that. So I didn't really see the point of cutting MP pay by 10%. It saved virtually no money in the grand scheme of things, and didn't lead to actual policy change. So you didn't take the pension as a councillor. So my question is two-part. Are you making the same commitment again as mayor? And if so, is that to give you a moral license then to make reforms to the defined benefit pensions of city employees?
So the second part is that's largely governed at the provincial level. So that's not something I'm running on within municipal jurisdiction.
You don't have jurisdiction over.
Well, not to get too much into the weeds of the local authorities elections plan, but essentially it's pooled amongst municipalities Alberta wide. So my platform doesn't speak to.
You could rip a page out of their own book and withdraw from the pension.
So my platform does not propose making changes to that.
Okay.
On the pension and compensation and perks for the councillors, in recent months, Sharp and others have championed huge increases to spending accounts, increases to the perks, amount of money they can spend on hosting for lunches and whatnot. What I'm proposing is having an independent citizen committee that's tasked with looking through the compensation, the transition allowance, pension, stuff like that, so that it's arm's length. In my perfect world, we would never have a city councilor or mayor advocating for raises for themselves or even pay reductions in order to grandstand. I want this completely separate. I don't want it to have any of the politics involved in that. And ideally, it would actually be set in stone for the next 4 years. We would have a set of suite of recommendations that would only take effect for the future council. And that's how I would propose. So I'm happy to abide by the recommendations of this group. I want to move on from kind of the symbolic bullshit. I want to really focus on the spending, the safety for the city, rather than getting so in the weeds over these constant fights over pension, pay, and whatnot. For me, though, the decision to follow through on my promise was very important. Like when I lost the election, I had the ability to take a $20,000 payout as virtue of losing the election. Essentially having gotten fired by my constituents. I chose to keep my promise to turn that down because I am a person who keeps my word, and I'm the only one in this race who can defeat Joti Gondek and has the proven track record of following through on my promises. Look, you can even look at my record. People would get mad at me for things I may have said or I may have done, but people never get mad at me for doing the opposite of what I said I would do. I've always done exactly what I said I would do, and you can see on my website today, my platform, what I'm setting out to do, which is controlling spending at city council, focusing on public safety, repealing blanket rezoning, and focusing on a more targeted development approach. So all of these things are on our website, and that's all I ask Calgarians to do is judge me based on my ideas and the fact that I've always proven my word on these things.
Okay. Well, I brought up pensions because you were there, but normally I agree. We get taxes and spending up at the very beginning of everything.
Yeah.
It just kind of worked into the conversation this way, but crime and drugs. I mean, it wouldn't have probably been in my top 5 questions 8 years ago. It probably would have creeped into the lower end of the list 4 years ago, but it's such an issue now. All the candidates I've had through here.
That touches everybody. It touches every ward of the city. It's not just a downtown issue.
Touches the far out suburbs, which have been untouched until pretty recently. The alley right behind our office at the newsroom here. There's always poor souls who are just seem lost to the world everywhere. I'm not sure what to do. I know, the old war on drugs way of doing things and treating everyone like a gangster, that's not going to work. The coddling that's been tried most extremely, say in Vancouver, that's obviously not worked. But then we've got, the province has talked about mandatory treatment. If done rightly, we're not going to just round people up like a dog catcher or something. But people who clearly need treatment. We're going to do our best. I don't know if that's going to work or not, but I'm kind of at the point where I'm willing to try anything. Do you think, are you behind mandatory treatment, or where do you see as the best things? I know you want to hire more police officers. You've said that's a part of it. At least all the candidates have said that they're in favor of hiring more police officers. Okay, great. But I'm looking for what might distinguish the different candidates. And where do you stand on things like mandatory treatment?
Yeah, so right now, both Sharp and Gondek represent like two extremes, and neither of them work, right? We, in Sharp's case, it's 500 more police, but ignore the root causes. And in Gondek's case, it's focused more on the compassion side of things. And it's very clear that we need both. So my safety plan calls for starting with increased investment in right sizing our pop to cop ratio. It calls for taking action in a way that both Sharp and Gondek have not over the last 4 years to reopening our downtown police station. It calls for sentencing and bail reforms, which I think is one of the most key part. We know that it's about 50 to 100 individuals who are responsible for the vast majority of repeat violent crimes, offenses against people, property. This is not popular to say, but those people need to be put in jail, right? That is such.
I think that is popular to say now.
No, well, but again,
now it is.
But again, like it can't stop there. We also need to fund getting youth out of gangs. We need to address human trafficking. We need to address drug trafficking, and we also need the supports around mental health, recovery, treatment, housing first, trauma-informed care. But it can't be one versus the other. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm running on a new path forward, is to kind of break that logjam, say that, yes, we got to right size our cop to pop ratio. Yes, we need to look at legislative reforms at the provincial and federal government. And yes, we also need to fund the softer things like youth mentorship, big brothers and big sisters, and so on.
Is mandatory treatment part of that mix?
Well, I know that the province is exploring it. I'm looking to the recommendations from our downtown safety leadership table. I believe that they were looking at exploring that. I'm happy to look at all of the evidence on all of this stuff. Turnstiles at train stations. There's a lot of ideas that people say if it's only this one thing, it's going to solve the problem. Yeah. It's never going to be just that one thing.
It's never going to be
as mayor, my job is to convene everybody. The provincial government have their ideas. The federal government have theirs. Our local cops have their ideas, as well as the folks working with the social agency have their ideas. So for me, I'm not at a point where I'm willing to take any of these ideas off the table.
Okay. I know there's not, this one weird trick will solve the fentanyl crisis or whatever. Yeah. That's not obviously the case. But I'm kind of at the end of my rope with what's going to work. I'm willing to try damn near anything just to throw it at the wall. It's maybe a dangerous thing to do when you're talking things that's important, but we've got to do something. And, you're a guy, you've been, I used to tease you for being so fascinated with the minutia of boring city government, pick up the dog shit, plow the streets, collect the garbage, fix the water.
And it matters to people. Like, look what happened with the water main crisis, right? All of a sudden,
I had to drive through there all summer, taking twice as long to work. It drove me absolutely crazy. And we're all stinky. So,
but how do we have $1 billion for the Flames for a new arena, but we don't have $1 billion to fix our pipes?
I agree,
right? So there's enough money, but in a city like Calgary to be able to address those fundamental needs.
But I've seldom, if ever, seen someone who has studied these issues in as much detail as you. And so I'm not looking for a process answer that you're not going to take anything off the table. You're going to listen. I mean, you must have thought about this. So, when I kind of press you again on, say, mandatory treatment. Again, I don't know if it'll work, but I'm looking for more than just a kind of a process answer that, you're listening. You're not going to take anything off the table, but I don't know. I'm asking for maybe a bit more substance on the answer around mandatory treatment. How on the table is it?
Well, the province wants to make the case, and I'm willing to look at the evidence, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Taxes. I need to be more specific in my questions with some of the candidates. Tax freeze and tax cuts actually means very different things to different people because there's scheduled increases or scheduled freezes, etc.
Or you could just reduce the big increase that you started with and be applauded as a hero for doing a reduction on, so you have just a giant increase instead of the huge.
So you'll have to forgive me. Some of the earlier interviews I did, I may have actually been a bit too easy on them, and I kind of realized that as I'm going through them that I should have dug a bit more in. So you have the misfortune of me having interviewed a bunch of the others.
We've known each other a long time too,
Yeah,
so I take no offense at this.
I know.
This is your job to hold politicians accountable.
But you're probably getting the harder interview because I've interviewed the others first, and now I'm more adept at these questions with them.
Well, you're probably not ready to be mayor if you can't survive Derek Fildebrandt. So.
Oh, put that on a hat. Okay. Taxes. I just left the city, out into the county. God, I mean, technically I'm paying more, but it's a bigger property. It's different, but like my rate is like wildly lower. Yes, there's less services, but I actually prefer the private services. But man, taxes in Calgary are just wild. I got sick of these wild increases every year. And it's not like the services are getting better. Services are getting worse. Crime's getting worse. Quality of life is getting worse, but my taxes just keep going up every year. What happens to taxes under Mayor Jeremy?
Well, that's largely going to be up to the provincial government. So when we think about making commitments to control spending and taxes within municipal control, you're making a promise for 60% of the bill. The other 40% is within the provincial jurisdiction, and
take that off the table. That's
at the end of the day, though, people see a tax bill, and if the tax bill is bigger than what they paid last year, they get pissed off at City Hall.
Sure.
Even if the mayor and council, as we should, I think, delivers holding the line within our scope, right? So I think that there's a transparency piece. Like, I'm not going to go to war with the provincial government on this, but I think that there's a transparency element where I think it should actually be two envelopes. Like, I think you should get the provincial portion, and you should get the municipal portion. And if you can see the municipal portion is the same as you paid last year, you can know that your mayor and council are responsible with the money.
Right. I follow this stuff pretty damn closely, and even I don't discern. So if even I'm not doing that, I really don't.
But the reason that I can't promise a specific number is because people will see the number that they get because of the two totals.
Okay.
And if the provincial government is forcing a 5-6% increase year over year on their portion, then people are only going to get pissed off at the mayor and council.
Sure. Okay. But between us girls, just the municipal portion. We just take the province out. So not everything they're going to see, because they're going to see the provincial portion too. Take that out. Just the municipal side. What happens? And I know you have to negotiate with a council.
Yeah.
But your platform. Assume say you get council on side, because there's a bunch of people running under the different slates who are probably going to be fairly aligned with you, and so maybe you get a council you can work with, and your plan gets through. What do taxes look like under your plan for 4 years?
Yeah, I was just sitting down with Common Sense Calgary and Peter McCaffrey, and he had a very specific question around exactly. And I in that survey, I responded at most within the inflation and population growth, like less than that. But I think that there's certain areas where we can actually reduce the budget overall. Like right now, because of the lack of attention from Sharp and Gondek on our water main infrastructure, we lose 25% of the water that we produce within our water utility. So 25% of the water that's produced in the water treatment plant is just lost due to leakage, due to the wooden pipes, lead pipes, asbestos pipes. So if we actually invested and fixed those pipes, we could reduce the rates that Calgarians pay by 25% or more. But look, I've run a local nonprofit. I've had to make every single penny count. People can actually look back to how I conducted myself in my budget in my local Ward 11 office when I was a city councillor. And I very strongly believe in financial responsibility. We have enough money, but it's going to require negotiating good deals on behalf of city taxpayers. We can't allow for something to happen again, like how Sharp and Gondek negotiated us into the Flames deal, right? So 85% of the upfront cost of this facility is being borne by the taxpayer, with about 100% of the proceeds, naming rights, revenue going to the private ownership, right? So we cannot allow for things like that. And that would be my strategy. On my website, I've gone through a bunch of different strategies, how we can implement zero-based reviews, how we can still continue to invest in the increase that we know we're going to need in police officers, and also the accountability and transparency piece. When I left City Council as vice chair of the City of Calgary Audit Committee, we were rated an A- in financial transparency by the C.D. Howe Institute. Today, we are at a D+. So there's a lot of measures that we have to implement from a process standpoint, so that not just that we're spending money wisely, but that Calgarians know how the money's being spent.
All right. So you said inflation plus population or less. Now, is that from a baseline of 0 or from already scheduled increases? Minus the province.
The bigger question for me is how can we drive the tax base? So there's a lot of city-owned land right now that is not generating any property taxes. Think the location, $30-50 million property up at Westbrook LRT station, like an empty parking lot. If that was actually developed into housing as part of a transit-oriented development strategy, we could actually bring a new taxpayer paying taxes on maybe $500 million to be able to reduce the burden that everybody else pays. But I'm thinking a lot about
existing. Yeah, I get. Yeah, you got to build the tax base. I get that. Although the crime at that LRT station, no one's going to want to live there until we get that cleaned up.
And then part of the issue is that how dodgy the finances and the reporting have been left by Sharp and Gondek make it very difficult for any candidate in this race to actually review some of those budget assumptions. So I'm going to do everything that I can to bring to City Council a proposal to be able to address some of the growth demands as well. Like we had 300,000 brand new Calgarians come to the city in the last 4 years. Many of them, just like my dad, who came as a refugee. My dad brought a lot of things, dreams, talent, strengths, but he didn't bring a swimming pool. He didn't bring a fire truck. He didn't bring a police officer. He didn't bring water pipes. Mm-hmm. So there's stuff that we have to invest in order for us to be able to actually make this work. But the difference between simply just spending money and investing is investing has to have that return on investment in that business case. And that's where I'm going to be relentless in driving the... Okay. There's a lot of folks who talk about spending money as if it was always investing. No. The difference between spending money and investing is investing actually has that return. For example, X amount of dollars to fix the pipes so that in year 2, we lose 10%, and in year 3, we lose 5%. People can get their heads around that. So people are not mad about paying taxes per se, but they're mad about not seeing the value. And that is the problem under the Sharp and Gondek-led councils. We haven't had that value.
I want to come back to taxes here. So you want to keep it at inflation plus population or less. But again, is that from a baseline of 0, or is that from a baseline of already scheduled increases?
Of 0. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's a big difference, and that's why I have to apologize because, like some earlier people,
there's some candidates who are saying like
I didn't. Yeah, they're like tax freeze, and then I didn't ask the follow-up question. That's kind of on me.
Yeah. So there's one candidate. Baseline from? So there's one candidate who's advocating for a freeze, but it's a freeze on the 5% increase that was scheduled next year, right? So
yeah, that's not a freeze.
That's really
That's not a freeze,
right?
Yeah.
That's just, but it goes to show the fact that we need more transparency, we need more accountability, and how the money is being spent. Period.
Yeah. See, this is why you're getting the harder interview.
I'm happy to answer the stuff. You know, I was there with the counselor tracker and all the rest, going through the weeds in the minutes. So.
Yeah. Blanket rezoning. I mean, it's another reason I decided to move out of the city into the county. It was like, well, I bought this house, and this is single family homes in this area, and I saw that as a property right because that was the law of this area for which I bought. That was changed after I bought. I saw that as not respecting my property rights in this area. But I do get communities have to change over time to an extent. We're bringing in people like crazy. That's we're an attractive place to live, and then Ottawa decided more or less to just open up the border entirely, and so. That's brought a lot of people in really quick. We need more housing. We've got to build. That's a big part of it. But how you do it right, the way it was before, I'm not really defend the way it was before. But blanket rezoning was a blanket policy. What happens with the blanket rezoning policy if you're mayor?
So I'm fully committed to repealing it and repealing it. I know that. Sonia Sharp tells a different thing to Livewire Calgary as she'll tell to Western Standard, to tell to CBC. My plan is to repeal it, to bring it back to the way it was before that day in May, and to move forward with a local area plan strategy. So my replacement strategy talks about how we can continue to build, but in a more community-informed way. I've earned the endorsement from Calgarians for Thoughtful Growth, who vetted my plan, and essentially calls for focusing the development to happen closest to LRT stations, close to activity centers, education, employment, where the services and infrastructure are in place to be able to support it. So the bigger issue, though, is the lack of listening. Right? How many Calgarians participated through the process, bringing their ideas, their expertise to the table, and a council that was unwilling or unable to listen to them. So there's two issues there. There's just the fact that the blanket rezoning hasn't delivered the housing that's affordable or attainable to Calgarians. And I'm in Glamorgan in Southwest Calgary, and it's kind of ground zero. What you'll see is a $600,000 bungalow being torn down, replaced with 4 $750,000 luxury condos. So what's being built under this policy isn't even attainable or affordable to the folks that this policy is supposed to help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and another thing is I'm the only candidate in this race who's provided a proactive, weekly updated list of donors. Right. So when you think about how certain elements in the industry would like certain rules to favor them or favor things like blanket rezoning, unlike Sharp or Gondek, I've from day one released a list of all of my donors so that every single Calgarian can know that I'm serious about implementing this policy. Both of those other two candidates have released a partial list, only current until July, and it doesn't actually capture who's supporting their campaigns.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Oh. I would say I'm just so grateful. Like I started as a kid from Dover with a stack of homemade flyers. I earned election as one of Calgary's youngest city councillors. In Ward 11, where I was running, I defeated a recent PCMLA who was running. But it really goes to show, like, Calgary, they judge you based on who you are, right? Not where you came from, not who your parents were. They judged you at the doorstep based on what you were going to do for the city. And I've been really grateful. Like, I was one of Calgary's youngest city councillors, a police commissioner. Following my loss in the last election, was able to continue to grow and to build high-performing teams, survive things like 172 days in the wilderness because I could build and lead high-performing teams. I've been a not-for-profit CEO. I've worked closely with the provincial government to be able to save Calgary in the event of another flood. We saved Glenbow Ranch from destruction. And I'm asking for Calgarian support to do the thing that nobody else in this race can, which is firstly, stop a political party takeover of City Council, change the direction of City Hall, and deliver on the promise of Calgary to make us safer and more affordable for every single Calgarian who lives here.
You know what? What you were saying just kind of spurred me to one last question. But I think it's a very symbolic question. Fort Calgary. It's now the Confluence. I guess the society that runs it, but I think it's under some degree of municipal control. They changed the name to the Confluence or something like that from Fort Calgary because that, I guess, was racist or colonialist or something like that. Would restoring the name Fort Calgary be something you'd do again?
So Sharp and Gondek ultimately voted for that name change. I've spent a lot of time listening to board members at the Confluence. I've spoken to folks who've been involved in the organization for a long time. I've also sat down with some of the local elders and chiefs with the Treaty 7 nations. What they've told me is that they would largely consider that to be a symbolic act of war. And for me,
to change it back to
it would be a great insult based on the reasons that the name change was brought in the first place. For me, I'd want to sit down with everybody first to be able to get a sense of how we can better reflect and showcase the story of Fort Calgary within that larger space. For me, I'm very much about how can we lower the temperature, how can we work together as a team, and how can we focus on more meaningful, tangible actions to be able to advance reconciliation rather than these symbolic things So for me, I'm still listening on this one. I want to hear from Calgarians about how we can both recognize the importance that it is for First Nations and the fact that it is a significant part of Calgary's history. I think both can happen at the same time in that space. So I think Fort Calgary's history can absolutely be celebrated within the larger context. So for me, again, I want to focus on tangible actions that we can move forward together as a community rather than relitigate, rehash all of these things like climate emergency, name changes. I want to get to work on day one as Calgary's next mayor to control our spending, to make Calgary safer, reopen our downtown police station, hire the cops we need, get to the root causes, repeal blanket rezoning. I want to focus on my 100 days on tangible actions that make life better for people rather than stir up needless arguments.
Well, an act of war. That's maybe what we call this interview. I like it. Jeremy, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Right. Well, that's Calgary mayoral candidate Jeremy Farkas in with us today. Election day is Monday. Just Google it, figure out where to vote if you haven't already voted in the advance polls. This is a big one and possibly the first time since 1981. Is it 81?
Yeah, I think 45 years.
45 years, longer than either of us have been alive, since a incumbent mayor may very well actually go down to to defeat. So if Jeremy wins, enjoy your job for life, because they never lose, except for now.
I'm not in there for life. I just want to get some stuff.
Mayor for life.
Move on.
Mayor for life, Jeremy Farkas. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and God bless.